Okay. So, Dr. Amol, please take over.
Good evening, everybody. So today is our second session of aortic surgery. So today we are going to discuss about aortic dissection. So this evening's talk is dedicated to this man. His name is Michael E. DeBakey from Baylor College of Medicine, Texas. He studied this dissection in detail, devised surgeries, devised instrument to deal with dissection, and he suffered from aortic dissection at the age of 98, and he defeated the aortic dissection even at the age of 98, and succumbed to natural cause of death at 99 years of age. So let us talk about the dissection. So whenever you are working in emergency situation, emergency room, you often get patients with chest pain. So chest pain is a very important symptom for the patient who are coming in ER. So we have to evaluate this chest pain in detail. It could be MI, it could be aortic dissection, or it could be simple gastritis. So whenever imagine if a 40-year-old male comes to ER with the history of chest pain, which is tearing in character or sharp in character, associated with backache, and he says that the onset of the pain is very sudden. He was having food and he had this chest pain, and you do a ECG and you find out that in leads 2, 3 and AVF there is ST elevation. So you decide to give him antiplatelets, but you are suspecting something else also. So you just stop and call your cardiologist. So just keep this scenario in mind. We are going to discuss in detail about this in a little while. So about aortic dissection, it's a general cardiac emergency. It's not a aortic emergency. Every cardiac surgeon must have an idea about dissection, because once in a lifetime, every one of us will face a case who is standing in front of you with the diagnosis of aortic dissection, and we have to deal with it ourselves. So we may or may not have the helping hand at that moment. So I consider it as a general cardiac emergency, and we must know how to deal with it. So the presentation of dissection may not be straightforward. So often there is a diagnostic dilemma, and we must keep a very high index of suspicion to diagnose aortic dissection and deal with it. Prompt diagnosis and treatment changes the trajectory for the patient, because every passing minute may damage his endurance and may move the patient towards the catastrophe like rupture, tamponade, etc. So prompt diagnosis is very important, and so is the treatment. Multi-organ involvement is often present in the form of mesenteric ischemia, peripheral ischemia, neurological symptoms, etc. Well-developed protocols and understanding between the team members is of prime importance, because it's an emergency where a good team is required. It's not the task of a single man who can handle the aortic emergency. So you need to have your own protocols for dealing with aortic dissection. Your perfusionist, your scrub nurse, your anesthetist, yourself, and other team members should be well informed about the case. Prognosis is guarded even after the best of the efforts. While counseling the patient's relatives, you must keep one thing in mind, that you might have done a very good surgery for the patient, but there is still a chance that patient may not survive this catastrophe. So starting with the anatomy, in last class we saw that it has got 3 layers: intima, media, and adventitia. So one more thing which I need to emphasize is vasa vasorum. Vasa vasorum is the arteries supplying the arterial wall. It can be interna, which comes from the lumen, or which is a branch of some other artery. So going to the pathophysiology of aortic dissection. Aortic dissection is defined as development of intimomedial flap. That is, intima and media get separated from its adventitia. So we can see in this picture, this crumpled up thing, which is a intimomedial flap, gets separated from the adventitia. So there is a development of false lumen. This is a false lumen, and the true lumen from where the original arteries are arising. So to see it in a cross section, that is in histology, this is the intima and this is the media. So this is the intimo-medial flap, which gets separated from a part of media which is outer and which is just adjoining the adventitia. So this is the false lumen where the blood seeps in and develops, it enlarges it further, and this is the true lumen. So macroscopically seeing it, this is the true lumen, which is lined by normal endothelium, and it is not having any thrombus or anything. And this is the false lumen, which is often completely or partially thrombosed, and which is not lined by any endothelium. So how this intimo-medial flap develops itself and separates itself from the adventitia. So basically there are two theories for dissection. The first theory says that the primary event is intimal tear. So here in this picture we can see that there is a breach in the intima. The blood seeps in because of the shear stress which is present in the lumen of the aorta, and it separates this intimo-medial flap from the adventitia. So the force which is generated by LV makes this progression of the flap, and it depends upon to what extent it travels, depends upon the quality of the media and the force which is generated by LV. So there is one more theory which says that intramural hematoma formation is the primary event, which leads to development of aortic dissection. So in this second picture, we can see that there is a formation of hematoma. And so how this hematoma forms? This hematoma is formed by rupture of this vasa vasora, that is the arteries supplying the arterial wall. Some evidence suggests that the patients who are coming with acute intra arterial wall hematomas, they may progress to development of dissection in the near future. So that theory supports formation of hematoma as a primary event. But in many cases, there is no hematoma which has formed, and there are only false lumen and true lumen. So that theory supports the intimal tear theory. So once the intimal tear or the flap starts developing, its progression depends upon the force which is generated by the LV. Suppose if you imagine the LV is here, the force of ejection will be in this direction. So the primary tear can be outer surface of the ascending aorta, that is right lateral wall of the ascending aorta. And if it progresses further because of the weakness of the media, the force is going to generate, the force is generated like this, and it hits back the under surface of the arch. So the second tear might be present here. Sometimes, rarely the tear might be present at just adjoining one of the arch vessels. In that case, the force might be force generated might hit the under the part of the arch from where the arch vessels are arising. The another most common place where the tear is present is just adjoining the left subclavian artery. This is present in case of type B dissection. So usually majority of the cases, the flap which is developed, it stops in either DTA or in abdominal aorta. But in some cases, it might reach the bifurcation of the aorta. So in abdomen, the false lumen which is formed is usually on the left side. So in majority of the cases, around 90% of the cases, the left renal artery arises from the false lumen and the right renal artery arises from the true lumen. Usually celiac and SMA arise from the true lumen, but sometimes the dissection flap enters the ostia of these two arteries. So further going in depth of pathophysiology, there are certain phenomena which happens in case of aortic dissection. First one is a malperfusion syndrome. So we must know what are malperfusion syndrome, when they happen, how they present, and how to manage them. So in this picture, we can see that there are two kinds of malperfusion syndrome. Malperfusion syndrome is nothing but one of the major territories of one of the major organ system is not getting enough blood supply due to the presence of intimo-medial flap which has developed in case of aortic dissection. So in first picture, we can see that the intimomedial flap, which is dangling in the lumen of the aorta, gets pressed upon the origin of some of the arteries, say for example renal artery. So whenever there is a systole, the pressure which is present in the false lumen, it just presses the intimomedial flap which is dangling to the mouth of the renal artery. So there is a dynamic kind of malperfusion syndrome which is present here. It gets corrected when we correct the entry tear. That is, when we close the entry tear either by surgery or by endovascular therapies, this kind of malperfusion gets treated. But the second kind of malperfusion which can happen is a static kind of malperfusion syndrome. In this case, the dissection flap or the false lumen extends into the lumen of the branch vessel, that is renal artery or SMA or celiac artery, and it forms a thrombus over the period of time. So this cannot be corrected even after addressing the primary entry tear or even after the endovascular treatment of the dissection. So the second catastrophic event which might happen, which as a complication, is the rupture. The rupture might happen when the intimomedial flap, which is thick enough to leave a very thin medial layers on the outer edge, that is on the side of the adventitia. So that is the case where the rupture is common, and it is more common in case of descending aorta than ascending aorta. So in case of type A dissection, where the entry tear is present in ascending aorta or a dissection flap is present in the ascending aorta, the flap might extend to the aortic root, and it might dislodge the commissure between the non-coronary cusp and non-coronary cusp and right coronary cusp, causing the commissural prolapse and aortic regurgitation. At the same time, the same flap can enter the ostia of right coronary artery and cause ischemia in the territory of right coronary artery. So if nothing happens, if no catastrophic event happens, then the dissection might become a chronic one. We define the chronic dissection as any dissection which has gone beyond 14 days. So that is called as chronic dissection. So patient might live for some time with a chronic dissection if none of these syndromes or none of these catastrophic events takes place. So coming to the classification, the first classification which was given for dissection was DeBakey's classification, and DeBakey classified dissection into three varieties: type 1, 2, and 3. In type 1 DeBakey's classification, the tear is present in the ascending aorta, and the dissection flap is present throughout the aorta up to the bifurcation. In type 2 DeBakey's, the dissection is limited only to the ascending aorta. And in type 3 DeBakey classification, the dissection starts beyond left subclavian artery. So ascending aorta is totally normal. So initial days of surgical practice, the people used to follow this classification, but this classification was not helpful for management of the patients. So in case in Stanford University, so when they followed this classification, started managing the cases, initially they used to do surgery in all cases, but in type 3 DeBakey type of dissection, the surgical mortality was very high. So they classified the aortic dissection to only two varieties, that is type A and type B. And they categorized them into type A as surgical disease and type B as a medical disease. Because in this case, in this type of dissection, when they took the patient for surgery, the mortality was around 31%. And when they managed it medically, it fell to 8%. So they termed this kind of dissection as a medical disease, and anything which involves the ascending aorta as a surgical disease. So classification of tear, this picture I have taken from AHA guidelines. So it does not help much in management, but we must have an idea what is tear, how it is classified. Type 1 is a classic tear, which is usually present in the ascending aorta and which progresses into aortic dissection flap, and it crosses beyond left subclavian artery and it might reach up to the aortic bifurcation. Type 2 tear is tear present in the ascending aorta, but it soon forms a hematoma and it gets restricted to the ascending aorta only. In type 3 tear, there is a tear and there is a flap which is not thrombosed, but it gets limited to ascending aorta only. In type 4, there is a penetrating aortic ulcer which is present on the undersurface of the arch. And in type 5, they defined it as a iatrogenic tear, like in case of any catheterization procedure or TAVI or any endovascular therapies for any aneurysm, etc. So coming to the risk factors or etiology, they are categorized into three factors. First one is the increased aortic wall stress. So these are the condition where aortic wall stress is increased and which might weaken the intimo media and forms the dissection. This hypertension, particularly if it is uncontrolled and unaddressed. Pheochromocytoma, again, the heart rate and BP both are high in pheochromocytoma, which might lead to increased dP by dt and development of aortic dissection. Cocaine and other stimulant use, the mechanism is again same. They are stimulants, they are sympathomimetics, so they can cause dissection. Weightlifting or other Valsalva maneuver, it increases the shear stress and intra-aortic pressure, which might lead to formation of aortic dissection. Trauma, when deceleration injury happens, there is usually a fixed part and the moving part, they come into, they don't match their motions. So there is a torsional injury, usually just beside the left subclavian artery, which will lead to formation of type B dissection and coarctation of aorta. So the another risk factor which leads to development of aortic dissection is any abnormality in the media. Last class we have seen that there are plenty of diseases which have got some molecular abnormalities leading to weakness of aorta, like Marfan syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos, bicuspid aortic wall, Turner syndrome, Loeys-Dietz, and familial thoracic aortic aneurysm syndromes. And in case of vasculitis, this aortic medial abnormality can lead to aortic dissection. So in iatrogenic group, the media is also normal and there is no wall stress, but there is a injury which is caused by some therapeutic measure like coronary catheterization or IABP or cannulation during the aortic surgery, aortic cannulation during the surgery, or cross clamping, which might just damage the adventitia and media and make them separate. So coming to clinical manifestations, catching the correct clinical manifestation and deriving correct diagnosis of type A or type B dissection is of prime importance, because slight deviation from the symptoms might land you in a different diagnosis, which might be, whose management might be totally opposite to the what we do in for aortic dissection. So pain character is very important. According to one of the studies, if you correctly elicit the history of pain with regard to quality, location, and onset, it yields 91% correct diagnosis in case of dissection. If any one of these is missed, then the yield falls to almost 50%. So quality of pain is tearing or it is ripping character, which is location is retrosternal and sometimes associated with backache, and the onset is very sudden. Means even in case of MI, which is a sudden onset chest pain, patient might not remember at what point of time he developed the chest pain. But if you carefully take the history in case of dissection, patient particularly remembers at what point of time he developed the chest pain, like while eating or while getting up from bed or while walking just out of the gate of his house. He exactly remembers at what point of time he developed the pain. So there is usually a pulse deficit or unequal pulse which is present which you should be looking for. Whenever there is a pulse deficit present or any unequal pulses are present, so there is a high likelihood of dissection. So this should not be missed. So any case which is who is coming into ER with chest pain and some neurological symptoms, there are high chances that the patient might be having dissections. Almost 17 to 40% chances that that patient might be having aortic dissection. So according to European guidelines, these are the things which are present in type A and type B dissection. Chest pain is present in 80% of the patient. Back pain is present in only 40% of type A, but 70% of type B dissection. Abrupt onset is present that we discussed. Aortic regurgitation is present in almost 40 to 75% of type A dissection. That the mechanism we already discussed. So let us see what guidelines say. So according to guidelines, these three things we must be eliciting whenever we encounter a case of aortic dissection. We have to evaluate the high risk factors. That is whether patient is Marfan's, whether he has any aortic, the family history of aortic diseases or dissections or any surgery, or you must elicit the history regarding any previous aortic valve surgery or any aneurysm or any aortic manipulation like post-op CABG, etc. Or you must look for high-risk pain features, which we just discussed. That is sudden onset, ripping or tearing kind of pain, which is typically situated retrosternally associated with backache. So this is the typical pain character which is present in dissection. And you should also examine the high-risk findings. We just said like if there is a pulse deficit, then there is a high likelihood ratio that high likelihood of dissection, presence of dissection, and any neurological deficits if present, that has to be elicited. So coming to the investigations, these are the investigations which we must be doing for any case. Chest X-ray is usually normal, but sometimes in case of type A dissection, we might have a hazy mediastinum or the widened mediastinum. In case of type B dissection, we might have left pleural effusion or left hemothorax with enlargement of the aortic shadow. And clinical correlation and the high index association is required in this. But if one thing is very important in this, as far as X-ray is concerned, is that if patient is not stable, then don't push the patient for X-ray. Directly go for either CT or intra-op TE for definitive diagnosis of any dissection. In case of trauma, it might hint towards any aortic injury. Some features which might suggest that it might be a associated aortic injury in case of polytrauma are fracture of upper ribs, especially left upper ribs, pushing of trachea towards the right, pushing of left bronchus downwards, hazy mediastinum or pneumomediastinum or associated hemothorax or pneumothorax, or widening of the mediastinum and left apical capping. So these are the features in case of a trauma, which will suggest you that patient might be having aortic injury. Coming to transthoracic echocardiography. So whenever we do a transthoracic echocardiography, the direct evidence to say that it is a dissection is to visualize the flap in the ascending aorta. But it is very difficult to visualize, especially when it is starting from distal ascending aorta or mid ascending aorta, we may not visualize anything. Only if it is starting from the root, then we can visualize this. But there are certain indirect evidences which say that it could be dissection. That is, there might be just a root dilatation, as in case of Marfan's, or there might be regional wall motion abnormality in inferior wall, because most commonly the dissection flap enters the right coronary artery. So right coronary territory might be ischemic, and you might get a regional wall motion abnormality in inferior wall. So pericardial effusion with echo densities. This is one more sign which might tell you that there is an impending rupture or a partial rupture of ascending aorta. Echo densities are there because the content of the pericardium is blood and it is not just the fluid. So AR with commissural prolapse or aortic wall prolapse, single cusp prolapse might be dissection. As we already saw in that picture, that aortic dissection might raise a flap at the point of commissure, and the commissural prolapse might be present. So sensitivity of transthoracic echo is around 80% and specificity is around 96%. So this is the parasternal long axis view of transthoracic echocardiography, which shows dissection flap in right lateral position of the aorta. In this case, we can see it is almost extending up to the aortic wall cusps. Coming to esophageal echocardiography, used as an intraoperative modality, but you can use it as a preoperative modality when a patient is not fit enough to be shifted to CT. So you can just do a TEE and establish the diagnosis and take the patient for OT. It is very valuable in patients with circulatory collapse who cannot be shifted for CT scan. It can assess the flap in the ascending as well as in the descending aorta. It can guide us for aortic valve repair, especially when the commissure is dislodged and it is prolapsing. We can fix it and we can just assess our aortic valve repair intraoperatively. Sometimes when Ehlers-Danlos or Marfan's or Loeys-Dietz patient comes, they might be having mitral valve prolapse, which might be associated with dissection. So it can guide us for repair. Perfusion of true lumen and false lumen on CPB and off CPB can be seen in TE, because if we are perfusing perfusing false lumen on CPB, then it is a catastrophic event because the whole of the body will not be getting any perfusion if we are falsely perfusing the false lumen. So we must ask the anesthetist whether the flow which we are giving, the CPB flow which we are giving to the patient, is going into true lumen or not. If it is not going to true lumen and if false lumen is getting pressurized, then we might change our cardiopulmonary bypass strategies. So sensitivity, it has got very good sensitivity and specificity of 98 and 95%. So these are the mid-esophageal views. So you can see a dangling dissection flap which is present in the ascending aorta. And in this picture, you can see that it is reaching up to the aortic valve cusp, and aortic valve cusp is also prolapsing inside the LV. So here you can see that there is severe AR which is present. So this is the same cut section, which is this short axis view, which is showing that there is a intimomedial flap which is raised, and there is also a commissural prolapse of aortic valves. So when we turn it backwards, it can show us the DTA and the flap in DTA. You can also put a color Doppler and see whether which lumen is being perfused on CPB. As we discussed in last class, CT is must in any aortic disease. That is true for aortic dissections also. So complete aorta can be visualized in this. Surgical planning depends upon CT, but even if sometimes CT is not possible and patient is not in condition to shift to CT, so in that case, you must take the decision on intra-op TE. ECG gating is must to avoid the artifacts, but smaller places might not have this ECG gating facility. But if ECG gating is there, then you'll have a better picture, because the intimomedial flap which is present in aortic lumen is continuously moving with each heartbeat. So if you take CT cuts in different time frames, then you might have artifact and you might not get an idea where exactly the entry tier or flap is present. Location of entry tier must be known, whether it is present only in ascending aorta or whether it is present in arch or DTA. Where are the re-entry tiers? Everything must be known, assessed on CT angiography. One thing we must rule out is any tear in the arch, because if tear is present in the arch, then it totally changes our management strategy. In this case, we must be doing total arch repair. If tear is absent in the arch, then we might just get out with doing hemi-arch, ventral plus hemi-arch. So any signs of malperfusion should be looked for. Like in case of renal malperfusion, one of the kidneys might be underperfused. So, or there might be some bowel edema, which suggests that there might be mesenteric malperfusion. So these things should be looked for in CT, so that appropriate action can be taken to prevent the end organ damage. The CT must include both the carotids, because many of the times we might be planning to cannulate the carotids for arterial flow. So we must be sure that whatever place we are planning for the arterial inflow, that area should be free from aortic dissection flap. So that we can perfuse the true lumen. So this is the CT scan, axial CT, which is showing, in this case, it is showing a dissection flap in innominate artery or brachiocephalic artery. And this is the dissection flap which is present in the arch of aorta. So we can see a discontinuity here. There is no dissection flap present in this part. So basically this is a tear which is present in arch. So we should be looking for this tear in the arch in each and every case. If we miss this, then it's a catastrophe to the patient in the post-operative period. He is going to have some neurological problems if we leave a tear in the arch. So going further, we have to assess ascending aorta and descending aorta. The same flap is present here, and it is going up to the root of the aorta. So in case of in abdominal aorta, we have to see which artery is coming from true lumen and which artery is coming from false lumen. Usually the lumen which is present on the left side is a false lumen, and lumen which is present on the right side is a true lumen. So here you can see the flap is just going and stopping at the mouth of the celiac artery. And the same thing with mesenteric artery. So this is the false lumen, and this is the left kidney which is arising from false lumen. So going further, this is the right renal artery which is arising from the true lumen. We should trace the flap distally and see whether it is involving the femoral arteries, because sometimes we might cannulate the femoral artery for distal body perfusion. So in that case, we must be looking for flap in the femoral arteries. So this is the coronal section, which is, in this case, sometimes the arch tear might not be visible in all axial cuts, but it might be visible in coronal or sagittal or sag oblique views. It can be seen. You can also see that the same flap is visible here in innominate artery. So this is another CT scan. Here the arch is clear, but there is a flap which is present in the ascending aorta. So this is the typically DeBakey type 2 dissection, in which there is the dissection is limited only to the ascending aorta, and it is not present beyond the ascending aorta. So this is the tear which is present. This is the tear which is present. One more feature which we can see in this CT is presence of aortic ulcer. So this crater type of thing, the crater type of thing which is present here, is a penetrating aortic ulcer. This might be a precipitating factor for development of the aortic dissection. So PO or penetrating aortic ulcers should be, if incidentally found, then they must be taken care of, so that in future patients should not develop any aortic dissection. So this is the sagittal section, which is showing the aortic flap of the same patient, and this is the ulcer which is present. So in this case, in sagittal or sag oblique V, we must be assessing the arch vessels also. One more thing which is evident in this case is the left common carotid and the brachiocephalic artery. They are arising from a common trunk. This is quite common in case of bicuspid aortic wall, or in case of Marfan's. It is called as Bowen trunk. Bowen trunk is like basically brachiocephalic and left carotid. They arise as a single trunk and then gets divided into two. So in case of arch repair and all, you must be having an idea about this. So going to the next slide. So according to ESC 2014, these are the things we must be looking for in case of CT. That is intimal flap, we discussed. Extent of disease, we discussed. Identification of true and false lumen, and re-entry tears, if any. And in case of, it is very difficult to say whether it is antegrade or retrograde aortic dissection, but if tear is present in DTA and aortic dissection flap is present in ascending aorta, then we can say it is a retrograde aortic dissection. But sometimes it is very difficult to differentiate whether it is antegrade or retrograde. And involvement of any side branches, malperfusions, organ ischemia, pericardial effusion, all these things are very important as far as management is concerned. So MRI, it takes time to acquire, so it is not very suitable for emergencies like aortic dissection. But if patient is very stable, and if he is a case of chronic dissection where no catastrophe is expected, you can subject that patient to MRI. Coronary evaluation. Conventional angiography is not indicated because the patient is already having aortic dissection flap, and if you put a catheter, it might pierce the false lumen and leads to rupture and death of the patient. CT angio can include coronaries. So in the same study, we can include coronaries, and we can see whether any coronary artery disease is associated with the dissection. But sometimes the radiologist fails to record the coronaries. So in that case, it is not necessary that you must go back and assess the coronaries. You can take the patient for surgery even without having assessed the coronaries. Cleveland experience says that there is no much difference when you don't assess the coronaries. So you might just put one graft extra if you suspect anything on intraoperative TE. So coming to the management. Management starts at pre-hospital point. A good communication between the referring physician and the operating surgeon is must, because operating surgeon can dictate the therapy which might be required for the patient on phone, and the management can start from the point where the patient is being referred. So what are the things we want to do or we should be doing in emergency department? We should be taking the details of the pain. As I said, it can yield the diagnosis in 91% of the cases. Any abdominal complaints has to be looked for, because it might be malperfusion syndrome might be associated, because if patient develops mesenteric ischemia, then mesenteric ischemia takes the precedence over correction of the aortic dissection unless it is ruptured. Any neurological symptoms should be known. If patient is having hemiplegia or cerebral infarct which is big enough and which is causing pressure symptoms, and if coning is expected, then neurological management takes the precedence over the aortic dissection. Any AS or AR should be looked for. any history of previous cardiac surgery should be elicited, because your approach might differ, or patient might be taking some anticoagulants which you want to stop, or give some procoagulants intraoperatively, or in case of in postoperative period. Any history of treatment outside the hospital is very important in case of aortic dissection, because as we saw in our scenario, the patient presented with the features of MI, because the aortic dissection might have raised the flap in RCA, and patient might have presented like inferior wall infarction. But if anybody outside the hospital, if they misinterpret this as a MI, and if they load the patient with antiplatelet therapy like 300 milligram of clopidogrel or eucosprin, then it will be very difficult for the surgeon to handle that case intraoperatively, because there will be very bleeding will be very heavy, and you might end up giving a lot of platelets and other blood products. So on examination, you should look for blood pressure and heart rate, whether patient is in shock or he is maintaining the hemodynamics. This is a very important step, because it totally changes your management. All the peripheral pulses should be looked for. Jugular veins are looked, because patient might be in a cardiac tamponade and you don't want to waste any much time on him. Murmur of AR is usually heard in around 40 to 75% of the patients. Abdominal palpation should be done, because patient might have malperfusion syndrome of SMA, and he might be having gut ischemia. Neurological assessment should be done. Groin, chest, and neck should be examined for any skin lesions, because these are the places where you might want to put your arterial cannula. So initial management of case of type A aortic dissection is first thing is control of pain, because pain leads to sympathetic overactivity, and sympathetic overactivity will increase heart rate as well as blood pressure, which increases the shear pressure on the aortic wall, which leads to progression of dissection. So control of heart rate is important. We can give IV metoprolol or esmolol or labetalol. Labetalol being both alpha and beta blocker, it decreases heart rate as well as BP. So it is a suitable agent for initial management to control dP by dt by controlling the heart rate and BP. So as soon as patient enters the ER and you have established the diagnosis of aortic dissection, type A aortic dissection, pre-op preparations and manpower communication with every member involved in the team should start from that point of onward, that point of time. So every team member should be informed, and every team member should have a fixed instruction about the management of type A dissection. The moment the type A dissection patient comes, it should ring the bell in everybody's mind, and everybody should be ready in time to tackle the case. So the same thing, whatever we discussed, they have put it in guidelines, that is reduction of dP by dt by using IV beta blockers. If IV beta blockers are contraindicated like in case of bronchial asthma, then we might use calcium channel blockers like verapamil and deltiazem, but we should not be using the nifedipine class of calcium channel blockers, because they decrease the blood pressure and they induce reflex tachycardia, which is not good for dissection patient. Target BP should be 120, that is systolic, and heart rate should be 60. We should be very cautious in reducing the heart rate in case of AR, because in case of acute AR, which is caused by commissural prolapse, there is reflex tachycardia which is present, which body tries to maintain the cardiac output by increasing the heart rate. And if we knock off the heart rate, then patient might land up in cardiogenic shock. And direct dilators are contraindicated. As I said, any dilators like nifedipine or nitroglycerin or SNP, etc., should not be given as an initial management. First, heart rate should be controlled, and after that, if BP is remaining high, then we can start on dilators. So this is the management protocol which is given in AHA as well as in ESC. So there are certain steps. The deal with shifting of the patient to a cardiac unit, that is mainly pre-hospital and intra-hospital management till the patient reaches the cardiac unit. Mainly surgical consultation, establishing of diagnosis, and control of heart rate and blood pressure. The second step, when the patient comes to you, you should assess whether the patient is having hypotension or hypertension. No guideline mentions any level of blood pressure beyond which you should be mentioning it as hypotension or something like this. But any mean BP of less than 70 is considered as hypotension. So if hypotension is present, then you must be taking surgical, you must be taking the patient for surgery immediately. So you don't wait for anything else. But if patient is having hypertension, then first we should control his dp by dt by controlling the heart rate. And if it is type A, then we must take him for surgery. And if it is type B, then we must be looking for optimal medical therapy plus or minus endovascular therapy. So the last part deals with, so we are certain that if it is type A, then surgery. If it is type B, then either medical management or endovascular therapy. But there are certain type B dissections which warrant immediate intervention. Like if in case of type B, if there are malperfusion syndromes, if a dissection is progressing, or if there is enlarging false lumen into subsequent CTs, or if there is uncontrolled hypertension after the development of the type B dissection, if there is chronic pain which is not relieved by medication, then these are the indications um, uh, uh, for surgery or any endovascular interventions in case of type B dissection. So as long as coming to the operative management, so these are the 3 points which the guideline says. The whole of the dissected ascending aorta should be replaced. And if aortic root is preserved, if the damage is not much, or if aortic valve is normal and aortic root diameter is normal, and if we can save the aortic valve, then the commissural prolapse, which is usually present, that should be repaired, and aortic root should be preserved, and only ascending aorta, the ascending aorta beyond sinotubular junction should be replaced. The aortic clamp site should be resected by doing a hemiarch replacement. This is not mentioned in guidelines, but the newer study says that if you leave behind the place where you put the clamp, then that might lead to future events which might warrant some kind of surgical therapy. So principles of surgical correction of type A dissection. We'll just discuss we have discussed the steps of Bentall in last class. So I'll just go on enumerating the special features or the things which we should be concentrating upon in case of type A dissection. So intraop setup is like central venous monitoring should be done by hydrocath, and right radial and left femoral arterial line should be put, one for upper body and one for lower body, especially when you are addressing the arch. So transesophageal echocardiography is must if you are contemplating any aortic wall repair or mitral wall repair, so it is must. So cerebral oximetry is one thing which is new for which is very specific for dissection, especially when we are addressing the arch or we are doing hemiarch by open technique. This cerebral oximetry is a very useful thing. So in a couple of minutes, we are going to see what is cerebral oximetry. So rectal temperature and nasopharyngeal temperature are, they should be monitored, that is upper body temperature and lower body temperature. Continuous urine output monitoring, every hour urine output monitoring should be done to know the renal perfusion. We should have rapid infusers and cell savers as standby. So cannulation strategy is like venous cannulation is bicaval cannulation. We can, for arterial inflow, we can use right axillary artery, which is a popular amongst many surgeons. But in case in AIMS, we use carotid commonly. We use very in less number of cases we use axillary artery, but carotid artery is used more often in AIMS. Femoral arteries are femoral artery can be used, but the use of femoral artery is controversial because if the aortic dissection flap is entering into femoral artery and if we falsely perfuse the false lumen, then it can be catastrophic. So we can keep the femoral artery as a backup plan, but we may not use it as a primary modality for arterial cannulation. The less popular method of arterial inflow is like direct cannulation of true lumen under the guidance of epiaortic ultrasound guidance, which is very complicated and may not be successful in everybody's hand. So this is basically CPB circuit and the CPB setup. So in this picture, we can see how we are going to form the arterial inflow lines. So this is the line which is coming from the pump. We should divide it with a Y connector. One should be kept for femoral artery or DTA, direct perfusion of DTA with the balloon catheter. The other limb should be used for cerebral perfusion. In that, one limb will go for either right axillary or right carotid, and one should be reserved for left carotid in case if this is not enough for proper cerebral circulation. So these are the various options we have in surgery. If the root is normal, we might just replace the ascending aorta. But only replacing aortic ascending aorta might leave this the clamp site behind, which might get dissected or rupture or aneurysmal in future. So it is always advisable to do hemiarch, minimum hemiarch in case of any aortic dissection. So if total arch is involved, that is, if tear is present in the arch, then we might go for total arch replacement along with ascending aortic replacement. If we are contemplating any future endovascular therapies, then we might just take all the arch vessels proximally onto the ascending aorta so that we can place an endovascular stent in future. So these are the various options for type A dissection. So going to the technique, just I will explain the principal steps. So once we are on bypass, we should open the ascending aorta, and immediately the root should not be resected out. Anything which is above the root should be, the aorta should be taken out, and after that we should assess the root. If root can be repaired, if the aortic valve is normal, the geometry is maintained, and if it is just the aortic flap which is making the commissure to prolapse and causing AR, then that commissure should be fixed first, and after that it should be assessed. And if you think that aortic valve is competent enough, then there is no need to replace the root. Just supracoronary ascending aortic replacement is enough. So to fix this aortic root, we can use the strip of PTFE patch, one inside and one outside, or we can use surgical glues like BioGlue and all. So once the root is fixed, we just replace the ascending aorta with the Dacron graft. Here they have shown that they are anastomosing the graft to the distal aorta proximal to the clamp site. So in this case, the distal ascending aorta is normal; it is not dissected. So in these cases, this step can be taken, but it is not possible in cases where the aortic dissection flap is present in front of the innominate artery. In these cases, you need to go for a hemiarch replacement with the open technique. So you have to exclude the place where you have put aortic cross clamp. So this picture shows that distal anastomosis is done first, and the proximal anastomosis is done as a second anastomosis, but you can do vice versa also. So addressing the arch. So when there is a tear in the arch, you must be replacing the arch. So the procedure will become either Bentall plus arch or ascending aortic replacement with arch replacement. So what are the situations where we will be doing total arch replacement? First one is if there is a tear. Second one is if there is compromise in the flow of arch vessels because of false lumen which is pressing upon the true lumen, or if there is a thrombus in the false lumen which is making the true lumen compromise in the true lumen and compromise in the cerebral flow. Associated arch aneurysms, that is the arch aneurysm more than 5.5 centimeter, then it's an indication for arch replacement. Or if future treatment for DTA flap or aneurysm is contemplated, like you want to put a endovascular stent in DTA for associated dissection in DTA or aneurysm in DTA, then we must be taking the arch vessels proximally so that we can comfortably put a endovascular stent in arch. So there are certain concepts in arch replacement. A well-trained team is must. So everybody should understand what is arch replacement, what are the modifications we must be doing for perfusion, what are the modifications we must be doing from anesthesia point of view and nursing point of view. Everybody must understand what exactly the technique is. So we may need the circulatory arrest. So we have to prepare ourselves for circulatory arrest. Like anesthetist must give methylprednisolone if circulatory arrest is contemplated. There should be a warming and cooling blanket which should be used if we are contemplating two temperature probes, one in nasopharynx and one in rectal. One in rectum should be used, and enough blood product should be arranged, because when we go on circulatory arrest and hypothermia, the bleeding risk increases once we finish the surgery. Two arterial monitoring systems we already discussed, one in right radial and one in left femoral, because we are going to use the right femoral if needed. Antegrade cerebral perfusion is one concept which is very important to understand in case of arch replacement. So whenever we cannulate right axillary or right carotid, so during the arch replacement, we are going to clamp it here and we are going to run the pump for antegrade cerebral perfusion. So the distal body is either on circulatory arrest, distal body circ arrest, or it will be perfused from DTA or from femoral artery. Sometimes when we are doing arch replacement and we are doing unilateral perfusion of the brain, the other half of the brain might not be getting the blood through this same perfusion. So how we are going to find out that other half of the brain is not perfused enough? So that we are going to do by using NIRS, that is near infrared spectroscopy, or cerebral oximetry. So these are the two values which I want to show. That one is the basal thing, that is 63% and 55% as a basal value, left and right side. When you put a clamp, like in this case, when you initially perfuse the whole body through this cannula, and during the arch replacement, when you put this clamp here and start perfusing the brain through this single cannula, and at that moment of time, if the left-sided values fall, it means that left-sided cerebral hemisphere is not getting enough blood. There might be some deficiencies in the circle of Willis, because of which the left half of the brain is not perfused. This is the point you should take the decision of perfusing the left carotids. So at this point, we must be using a balloon tipped catheter, which we are going to insert in left carotid and perfuse the other half of the brain. If distal body, if you think that the arch replacement is simple enough, and if it gets finished within 20 minutes, then we may not perfuse the distal body at all, because anyway we have gone till 24 degrees Celsius we have cooled the body. So the distal body can survive for 20 minutes, at least comfortably 20 minutes. So we may not do any perfusion in the distal body. But if you are thinking that the arch replacement would take more than 20 minutes, then we must have some backup plan for perfusing the distal body. Either femoral cannula, which might perfuse the distal body, and the DTA should be either clamped, or a balloon should be put, or a balloon tipped catheter should be used from DTA to perfuse the distal body. So there are certain techniques of arch replacement. The first one is a simple technique, is called as island technique, where we harvest a island of arch vessels, and we first anastomose the graft to the DTA, then we anastomose this island to the graft. But this is not very much suitable in case of dissection, because there will be two flaps. One is intimomedial flap, and one will be the adventitial flap, which we may fail to hold them together. So this technique is suitable for arch aneurysms where there is no flap present, but it is less suitable for aortic dissections. This is the another technique which we can use, where we use the arch graft, which has got three side branches for each arch vessel, and one more side branch for perfusion. So this is another technique. This is the third technique which I just mentioned, that when you are contemplating future endovascular therapies, so you want to take all the arch vessels proximally on ascending aorta, so that you can just put a stent graft which starts from the arch and enters the DTA. So coming to the post-operative course and complications, pain control is very important to prevent sharp rise of BP or heart rate, and which may lead to bleeding, increased bleeding. So control of DP by DT by injectable beta blockers or oral beta blockers through NJ tube or oral is important. Bleeding is very common in case of aortic dissection. If you think that while closing the chest, if you think that there is the bleeding is more, then you can just pack the mediastinum with roller gauze, wait for 24 hours, and we can take out that gauze piece. The cause and secondary closure can be done. But if bleeding is not much, then primary closure can be done. Enough blood product should be in hand to control the bleeding. Early malperfusion syndromes are common. So in post-operative period, we must be looking for every hour urine output should be monitored. Abdominal girth should be monitored, and any abdominal symptoms, any neurological symptoms, or any weakness in the lower limbs, which might suggest some spinal cord ischemia, everything should be monitored and addressed if the malperfusion happens. Every day, at least 3 to 4 times, the neurological condition of the patient is assessed by either the intensivist or the neurologist. Recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy is very common if we have gone for arch replacement. So while after extubation, patient might have some micro aspirations, and which might lead to development of pneumonia. So this should be kept in mind. So one imaging should be done before the discharge if you have extensively replaced aorta, or if you have gone for arch replacement. Medications like the beta blockers and ACE inhibitors or AT1 antagonists have shown some survival benefit in case of dissection as well as in case of aneurysms. So long-term follow-up is required in all genetic syndromes, bicuspid aortic valve, so that they might develop some problems in the remaining aorta. So every year one MRI should be done to look for the remaining aorta. So this one paper mentions about the long-term results of repair of type A, acute type A dissection. So actual survival of all the patients who have undergone surgery for acute type A dissection is around 80% at 10 years, which is quite acceptable. So survival is less in case of patients who have got a patent false lumen in the remaining aorta. Means patient had undergone Bental for type A, but there is still a false lumen is present in DTA or abdominal aorta, then that patient fares uh, worse than compared to the patient who have got occluded false lumen with the thrombus. So once the false lumen gets thrombosed, those patients are not the catastrophic events or the progression of the dissection is much less common in occluded false lumen than in patent false lumen. So survival in case of Marfan's and non-Marfan's is not very much different. So it is almost the same. But when we come for freedom from treatment, again the same thing. If the false lumen is occluded with thrombus, then the retreatment rates are very less. But when the patent false lumen is present, then there are very high chances of retreatment in the form of surgery or in the form of endovascular therapies. As far as survival was concerned, Marfan's and Marfan and non-Marfan, they were almost similar. But but when freedom from retreatment is considered, retreatment is slightly more in case of Marfan's. It may not be the difference may not be very much, but Marfan's have slightly more chances of undergoing future therapies compared to non-Marfan's. So coming to type B dissection, as we said, it is not a surgeon's territory, but there are certain situations where surgeons are rolled in while managing this type B dissection. So we must know at least the basics and role of surgery in case of type B dissection. So type B dissection is a dissection which is present beyond the subclavian artery. So it's a medical disease. There are certain risk factors for type B dissection which are similar to type A, like aortopathy in case of bicuspid aortic wall, Marfan's, other genetic aortopathies, and coarctation, and increased shear stress like hypertension, renal failure, pheochromocytoma, and trauma. In trauma, the adjoining part of aorta just beside the origin of left subclavian artery is the most common site where the tear or the dissection is present in case of trauma. So these are the different, these are the two types of type B dissection, that is Stanford 3A and Stanford 3B. 3A is like the dissection present in only in thoracic aorta. Type 3B, it is present in thoracic as well as abdominal aorta. So there are certain terms which say that uncomplicated or complicated type B. We must differentiate these two kinds because we might be contemplating some surgical intervention in case of complicated type B dissection. So what are the groups which comprises of complicated type B dissection? If there is a rupture of false lumen, if false lumen is enlarging, or if some malperfusion syndromes are associated with the type B dissection, or if aortopathy is present, like in case of Marfan's or bicuspid aortic wall, or patient is having a chronic pain. The enlargement of the aorta might not be much, but patient is having chronic pain because of pressure on the retroperitoneal nerves, or because of ischemia, chronic ischemia of one of the organ systems which are supplied by either DTA or abdominal aorta, or the true lumen is chinked enough to cause some low flows distal to the dissection. So these are all comprises of complicated type B aortic dissection. So whenever the patient undergoes CT scan for type B dissection, there are certain high risk features in case of in CT scan which we might be interested as a surgeon. So these are, if the false lumen is more than 22 mm, total aorta more than 40 mm, if there is a single large tear, that is a high risk CT feature. If the false lumen is not thrombosed, if false lumen is patent, then that is also a high risk CT feature. And in two subsequent CTs, if the false lumen is enlarging, there is no definite guideline or limit of enlargement, but they say that after 3 weeks or 1 month, if any enlargement of false lumen is significant. So coming to the management protocols for type B dissection. So whenever there is a type B dissection
नहीं
present,
करो
you
क्यों करते हो भाई
you should see whether the patient is having a complicated one or uncomplicated one. We just mentioned what are the complicated type B dissection. If the patient is having complicated type B dissection, then we should evaluate that patient for endovascular therapy. And if the anatomy is suitable, then we should be going for endovascular therapy for type B dissection. If endovascular therapy is not possible, then we must be preparing the patient for surgery, because the type of type B dissection is complicated. So patient might have some catastrophic event and might succumb. So we must be repairing that complicated type B with surgical options when endovascular therapy is not possible. So this is a gray area which might be a subject of discussion in case of exam, in case of practical exam. So if type B dissection is present and it is uncomplicated, means simple type B dissection, then we must see whether there are high risk features upon CT, which we just mentioned. That is false lumen more than 22, total aorta more than 40, large entry tear, patent false lumen. We should be looking for these 4 features. If these 4 features are present, or any one of them is present, then we should take we should offer endovascular therapy for that patient. But again, we must evaluate the anatomy, and if it is suitable, then we must consider for endovascular therapy. But if anatomy is not suitable, or if patient is very old, or he is having comorbidities and life expectancy is not more than 5 years, then we might just continue with the medical therapy with frequent surveillance. So this is the gray area which has got a lot of controversies. Means patient is having type B dissection which is uncomplicated, and on CT also there are no high risk features. So what are the options? So this is a gray zone, and it has got a potential for discussion. So let us see. So there was one trial which was conducted for these kind of patients. That is INSTEAD trial, the investigation of stent grafts in aortic dissection. So at 2-year follow, they showed that TAVR, or the endovascular therapies, did not increase any survival in case of uncomplicated type B dissection. So at 2 years, they published this data, and that point of time, it was concluded that unnecessary endovascular therapies are not required for type B dissection. But when that trial was extended and 5 years, the patients were followed for 5 years, the data came out like this. The all-cause mortality was higher in case of medical therapy group. Aorta-specific mortality, that is, patients are dying of rupture of aorta or malperfusion syndrome or progression of aortic dissection, was more in case of optimal medical therapy compared to endovascular therapy. And disease progression, that is enlargement of false lumen, or progression of false lumen lengthwise, everything was more in case of optimal medical therapy group compared to the endovascular group. So to put it in a tabular form, the TAVR group or the endovascular group, it could cover the entry tier. So the force in the false lumen was reduced, which was not there in medical therapy group. The aortic diameter got stabilized in endovascular group, but it was not possible in case of medical therapy group. Complete false lumen thrombosis was present in 90%, up to 90% in case of endovascular group, but only in 22% in case of medical therapy group. Maximum and redirection of the blood flow to true lumen was present in 32%. The true lumen, maximum true lumen, which was there in case of endovascular group, was only 32.6 mm, and in case of optimal medical therapy, it was 18.7 mm. It means that false lumen was compressing upon the true lumen. So the true lumen diameter was less in case of optimal medical therapy group. So morphological evidence of remodeling of aortic dissection were evident in almost 80% in case of endovascular group, but only in 10% of medical therapy group. And what are those evidences? That is, the re-entry is sealed, false lumen is thrombosed, and there is shrinking of the false lumen and absence of diameter progression. All this signifies that the dissection has remodeled itself and reduced the risk of any future complications. So we have finished the lecture, and I think we can discuss it further. Sir, I have finished the lecture, sir.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening. Just give me 1 second. I was working on.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Amol, for an excellent talk. Are there any questions that you would like to ask? I'm looking at the chat. There are no chats there. So, Amol, what are the strategies for cerebral protection in aortic surgery?
Sir, first one is we should be planning the surgery well enough to know whether we are contemplating any arch interventions. If it is not, we are not intervening anything for the arch, then we need not worry about the cerebral protection, because it is just another cardiac surgery, which like any other cardiac surgery. But if we are doing anything for arch, like hemi-arch replacement with open distal technique or total arch replacement, then we must have antegrade cerebral protection, antegrade cerebral perfusion with axillary artery cannulation or right carotid artery cannulation. So in antegrade cerebral perfusion, we use 30% of the normal flows. That is, if normal flows are 3 liters, then we must be giving around 800 to 900 ml per minute of flow to the brain. The second strategy which we must be adopting for cerebral protection is monitoring of NIRS or cerebral oximetry. Like I showed, if the left-sided values are coming down, if they are falling more than 30% on the left side, then we must have a backup to perfuse left carotid artery. So we must be having a balloon-tipped catheter handy. So when we open the arch, we should insert the catheter inside the left carotid artery, and we should perfuse both the hemispheres. The other additional things which we can do is packing of the head with ice. There are some certain studies which show that methylprednisolone is helpful, but it is not a proven thing. And these are the main things.
What about retrograde cerebral perfusion?
Sir, retrograde cerebral perfusion, some surgeons prefer retrograde cerebral perfusion, but it is mainly used when there is a air embolism, because it is not a physiological flow which is present in retrograde perfusion. So I think antegrade will be better than retrograde.
Well, Bob Bonser has published extensively on retrograde cerebral perfusion, and that was the strategy of choice actually in his aortic arch surgeries.
Yes, sir.
So does anybody in India perform retrograde cerebral perfusion?
Sir, I think the consultant with whom Dr. Vikas is working, he prefers retrograde perfusion.
So what is the benefit of retrograde over antegrade or antegrade over retrograde?
Sir, retrograde, we need not perfuse both the hemispheres separately. So if we just cannulate SVC and start perfusing, then that is enough to perfuse both the hemispheres, because the venous system is interconnected. That is one thing. And if any debris or air which has gone up, it will get washed away with retrograde perfusion. So these are the advantages. And the advantages of antegrade is like it's a physiological flow. So the cerebral protection might be a little better than the venous, the retrograde flow, sir.
And what are your strategies for spinal artery protection? For spinal protection?
Sir, spinal protection, sir, I will be discussing this topic.
Type B does rather than type A.
Thoracoabdominal, but to just to give an idea, so there are certain strategies to protect spinal cord. First one is we must be taking out some spinal fluid to reduce the hydrostatic pressure of spinal column, and we must be sparing bilateral vertebral arteries and bilateral subclavian arteries, so that the spinal artery, the main origin comes from the base of the neck, that is from bilateral subclavian arteries and the vertebral artery. So
okay, we'll talk about it in your next lecture, Amol. Sorry, I asked it a little out of hand. Yeah, Simran wants to say something. Simran?
Good evening, sir.
You raised your hand.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Tell me.
Amol, again, a wonderful talk, Amol. Wonderful talk.
thank you.
Just two questions.
Yes.
When you guys do retrograde through the SVC, what is the pressure you guys perfuse at?
It is like 40 mm of Hg.
Okay. And when you guys do antegrade cerebral,
Yeah.
do you guys follow alpha stat, PH stat, or no stat? Just cool.
Just cool.
Just cool.
Just cool, yeah. But they say that this alpha stat is better. But there are, I don't know about any studies which they have performed to see in case of, because there are ample number of studies which are there in pediatric group or in
Exactly.
also, but cerebral antegrade cerebral perfusion with pH or alpha stat, I am not aware of any study like that.
Okay. And what are the flows you guys perfuse at in adults for antegrade?
It's like 30% of the flow when single cannula is used. Like if you are targeted whole body flow is 3 liters, then you might be perfusing at 800-900 ml with a single cannula, and around 1200 with both the cannulas, like right and left carotid.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. A wonderful talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandeep.